Sitting ducks. That's how yesterday I described the truckers stuck on the Mozambican side of the border, ferrying cargo worth millions following the closure of the Libombo crossing due to protests of the contested election in that country. And it's a significant amount of it is coal. That we're even here to some degree speaks of the spectacular failure of the South African state-owned rail operator Transnet. Now, as you know, unrest began after objections were raised about the result of the elections, in which the ruling Frelimo party claimed a more than 70% share of the vote to continue its 49-year reign in Mozambique. Widespread protests have led to escalating violence, and authorities have since suspended the movement of goods from that country. Drivers were simply ordered to park their vehicles on the side of the road, step out of them, and leave. Customs officials have not been allowing any movement, and now those stationary trucks are being targeted. Some drivers say they've been attacked with pangas and knives and had to abandon their trucks, fleeing into the bush in the dead of night. What does this all mean for our economy? Gavin Kelly is the CEO of the Road Freight Association and joins us now. Gavin, always a pleasure to have you on the show. How bad is the situation at the border now?
Good morning, Bongani, and good morning to your listeners. Unfortunately, every time we chat, it's about some crisis or another, isn't it?
Right.
And this one, really, you thought the COVID had humanitarian issues, and we really struggled to assist our drivers. Now we've got drivers stuck across the road or across the border, and we need to try and get them out as best we can or find them some protection. And, of course, the goods and the trucks are also standing there. So, first of all, last night, but I see the queue has reduced on the South African side. We had about 25 kilometers queuing of trucks, not right at the border. There were queues in nearby towns being 5 or 10 k's away as well. So, first of all, we're trying to deal with those queues, because in South Africa, that's a very good opportunistic target for crime. So we've got the South African police services in the various regions, the various towns where our trucks on our side are stuck, looking after them, trying to make sure that they don't get attacked. That includes traffic officials. We've got private security assisting, and we're very, very grateful for everyone doing that. Obviously, we need for our drivers to get food to them and water for them, or more importantly, we're trying to turn some of those trucks around back to the depots they came from, especially if they've got perishable foods on board. The coal trucks, well, they can't go back and dump it in the mine and come pick it up, a week or two later to take it. So we're stuck with some trucks. At the border, that's obviously closed. It's really because we cannot guarantee, when I say we, South Africans, Customs, us as an association, and the Mozambicans can't guarantee the safety of those trucks and those individuals moving from the border down to Maputo or wherever they were going to go. That costs a lot of money.
Yeah, you've already pegged the losses to the economy at 5 billion rand so far.
No, I was misquoted on that. That's 5 million. That's 5 million.
I did think it was an extraordinary number.
Yeah. No, that was 5 million. I think last night when we got some figures in and you start adding in the various costs, we're actually sitting now at 50 million. Because remember, there are upstream and downstream costs that come into play in terms of this. We've had a number of vehicles torched that we're now aware of in Mozambique. As you were saying, drivers are fleeing for their lives. Trying to get hold of those drivers and getting them to a point where we can extricate them has been the biggest challenge for us.
Well, not only are they fleeing for their lives, reports are suggesting they've had to abandon some of those vehicles. Already goods are being looted.
Yes.
And as you say, the trucks torched. So they might be lucky to even retrieve the vehicles, much less the cargo.
Well, exactly. This is why that figure's climbed to 50 million now. So we know in one spot, it was about not even 5 k's away from the Mozambican side of the border, that 5 vehicles were looted and torched, and we know that's happened closer to the capital. It's happened around the harbour. So that's the biggest problem, is that if your vehicle is there, and unless it's unladen and there's no guarantee it won't be touched, you've probably lost that vehicle. And as a small operator, that's a death blow.
18 people reportedly killed so far in the protests and the violence that's erupted. I mean, this thing is not going to stop anytime soon, is it?
Man, it looks like we're back to the 1970s in that country, and that's exactly what created that civil war once the Portuguese had left, was between Frelimo and Renamo. And I'm not exactly sure if that's what has stood up again, but there's not going to be a simple and short solution to this at all, unless they go for what we have as a government of national unity, I suppose.
Pretoria seems so far to be just a passive viewer of all of this.
Yeah, it's actually been quite surprising. We put together one can call it a task team, but it wasn't something as official as that. We got all the local role players to help as quickly as we can, and I must say that the South African Revenue Services, SARS, the South African Police Services, the local traffic, and all those sorts of authorities really jumped in and helped us. And about 3 days ago, we tried to pull as many trucks across as we could, whether they were South African or other trucks like Namibian or Zimbabwean, we tried to pull them across. But it is interesting that there hasn't been any statements that I can say I've seen from government to the Mozambican saying, chaps, you need to sort this out. A, and B, you need to provide some sort of protection along that corridor, because we are going to lose a lot of money in terms of the broader economy, because we can't get to Maputo.
And it just seems to be a region-wide problem. Diplomatically, SADC, I would say, seems completely toothless to say, much less do anything, when this kind of failure occurs around elections in the region. We've seen it repeatedly in Zimbabwe. We're seeing that now here in Mozambique. And as I said in my introduction, we shouldn't really even be here, in a sense, if Transnet was operating optimally.
Well, Bongani, you've asked me two vexing questions. The first is around the power of SADC, and, I can only make a statement. If the political will isn't there, I think we've got the capacity, we've got the capability. But if member states don't want to get member states to toe the heel, then I think we've got a problem. And secondly, you're absolutely right. But then we're not sure whether if the rail was running to Maputo, whether that would actually still be running. But absolutely, the volumes on the road through that Lubombo border post should not be there. They should be on rail.
We initially, of course, it's funny how these stories develop a life of their own. Initially, when my team and I discussed having you on the program, we wanted to talk to you about something entirely different. And this was the rise in goods in transit heists, right? We're familiar with cash being taken. But now, of course, as more South Africans get into the e-commerce economy, we're seeing that those vehicles are increasingly the target of criminals. What's your take on that? What's driving the vehicle hijackings of courier services?
Well, the first thing is that this is going to be a market to receive these goods that have been hijacked. It's just like scrap metal. And I think there has been some legislation passed recently to try and deal with scrap metal dealers. So whilst that side of the demand is porous in terms of being able to deal with the criminals, we're going to have that. It's like false IDs and false driving licenses. So you've got to deal with those who are feeding the demand. And then obviously with couriers are everywhere. There isn't just a single road that they'll be driving on. So it becomes very difficult to deal with the criminals where they act and to apprehend them. Cash in transit is a big one. Anything that's of high value in electronic goods. And we've seen horrendous stories of couriers who are carrying cell phones being targeted. So it's really become, I would say, easy meat for the criminals, because everybody's going to online ordering, and those vehicles ply our roads every day, everywhere, every hour. It's a challenge.
How does that affect South Africa's competitiveness globally, and what will that mean in terms of the growth of e-commerce in South Africa?
Well, we are not the only country that is struggling with that, believe it or not. A couple of years ago, and I'm not plugging the new president of the US, but a couple of years ago, the courier companies could drop parcels on your porch and nobody touched them. Evidently in the States in the last 10 years, you can't do that anymore. So they target couriers there. They target small parcels. So it's very, very much a worldwide phenomenon that e-commerce has become an easy target for criminals. And we try and learn. There is an association in South Africa called TEPO, which is a security company that brings in all the learnings and the lessons from around the world. But the one thing it is going to do is going to drive up the cost of deliveries, because your security is going to need to be increased exponentially.
It's quite extraordinary. Gavin Kelly, I hope one of these days we will have a conversation on more positive news. Gavin Kelly is the CEO of the Road Freight Association. So that crisis bubbling up on the border of Mozambique is going to affect this economy. 5 billion is not the correct figure, but he says already, of course, the cost of that has risen to about 50 million rand, the amount to losses because of those disruptions of cargo moving through the Limpopo border crossing. And again, as he says, and as I say, we haven't heard much from Pretoria.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.